pile on with that by talking about friendship. So, and to do that, I want to take what I think is the most brilliant example in the whole Bible, Jonathan and David. So, I'm going to start by reading some passages here that I'm sure they'll bring up on screen. So, everybody remembers David taking on Goliath. And this picks up right after that. As David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, "Whose son are you, young man?" And David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite." When he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan, the son of Saul, was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Now we're skipping through highlighting verses in this section. As Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all the servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, "Saul, my father, seeks to kill you there. For take heed to yourself in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself. I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you. And if I learn anything, I will tell you." And Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father, and said to him, "Let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have been of good service to you. For he took his life in his hand, and he slew the Philistine. And the Lord wrought a great victory for all Israel. You saw it and rejoiced. Why then would you sin against innocent blood by killing David without cause?" And Saul hearkened to the voice of Jonathan, and Saul swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death." And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all of these things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as before. And Jonathan said to David, "Come, let us go out into the field." So they both went out into the field, and Jonathan said to David, "The Lord, the God of Israel, be my witness. When I have sounded my father about this time tomorrow or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed towards David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? But if it should please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan and more, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the loyal love of the Lord, that I may not die. And do not cut off your loyalty to my house forever. When the Lord cuts off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth, let not the name of Jonathan be cut off from the house of David. And may the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies." And Jonathan made David swear by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. And Jonathan said to him, "Tomorrow's the new moon. You will be missed, because your seat will be empty. On the third day, you will be greatly missed. Then go to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was at hand, and remain beyond yonder stone heap. And I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I had shot at a target. And behold, I will send the lad, saying, 'Go find the arrows.' Now if I say to the lad, 'Look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them,' then you are to come, for as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then go, for the Lord has sent you away. As for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever. And may God bless to us and to our understanding these readings from his word. Some years ago, some Allied servicemen outside of London, England, decided on Christmas Eve to go into the city for an evening of worship service. As they entered the city, they happened to pass by St. Anne's Orphanage, in front of which was a large sign that announced that the children in the orphanage were those who had lost their parents in the Nazi bombing of Blitz on London some years before. Our GIs decided that instead of going to the city to be ministered to, that they would go to the orphanage this Christmas Eve and try to minister to the young people there. And this they did with some success. But there was one little boy who did not want to enter in. One of our service personnel went over to him and said, "Young man, what do you want for Christmas?" And the little boy replied, "Sir, I want to be loved." Now, that, in essence, is the cry of every man. I want to be loved. Now, I choose to translate that sentence this morning. I want a friend. Now, when I equate the word love and the word friendship, I'm not doing it romantically, I'm not doing it philosophically, I'm not doing it mystically, I'm doing it biblically. In the Bible, love and friendship are the same thing. Jesus says to his disciples, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples, when you have love one for another." And then a moment later he says, "I do not call you servants, I call you friends." To be in friendship is to be in love. The question then arises, how do we enter into meaningful friendship? Now, I would suggest that there are 4 steps to friendship. And they're outlined for us in this story we just read of the Bible's most perfect friendship, the friendship of David and Jonathan. Their experience together, the recording of it at least starts in the 17th, 18th chapters of 1 Samuel, where it's told how David kills the Philistine giant Goliath, brings his head to Saul, is introduced to Saul, has a conversation with him. And when the conversation's going on, Jonathan, Saul's son, hears everything. He sees it all. He finds himself strangely drawn to David. He wants to be David's friend. And so he goes to him and he proposes that they enter into a covenant of friendship. Jonathan wants his relationship with David to be what Aristotle, hundreds of years later, would describe friendship as being: one soul in 2 bodies. In wanting this, Jonathan doesn't hesitate to express this desire to David. Now, this seems hard and strange to us. We're not given to going up to people and saying, "I'd like to be your friend. I would like to enter into friendship with you." Yeah, we don't do that. Yeah. And look, we don't do that, I think, for a couple of reasons. One is, when you assert that you want or need your friend, or when you say, like that little boy said, I want to be loved, and by you. When you say that, you're making yourself terribly vulnerable. You're asserting your need. And hey, in our society, we don't want to look needy. We want to appear self-sufficient, as if we don't need anyone. On the other hand, the reason we don't go to people with an open invitation to friendship, we're scared they might say no. And we don't want to be rejected. In this way, we're very much like the Frankenstein monster. You know, it's that 200-year-old story continues to be rehashed. Just last month, a tale about building an almost human robot. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. Powered by artificial intelligence, the latest trendy thing, was released as a book called The Actuality. And the same week it was released, the BBC went and optioned it as a TV series. You know, the interest is still there, and I'm sure you've seen some of the Frankenstein movies over the years. Yep. You know, we've all imagined that to be the inspiration for some of these really scary stories. And I think on the late night reruns over the years, I've seen just about every Frankenstein production, and you know what? They're all cheap shots. None of them even remotely resembles the story as Mary Shelley wrote it. We've yet to see that one portrayed. For Mary Shelley, she saw the monster as a very pathetic and sympathetic creature. One who didn't want to be made, and after being made, found it impossible to enter into friendships. Because whenever he approached people, he was terrified they'd reject him because of his ugliness. The climax of the story comes when the monster goes to his creator. Dr. Frankenstein utters these particular words, and I want you to notice how different they are from the grunts and groans that we hear Boris Karloff and others inspired who's played the monster. You know, as Mary Shelley wrote him, he says, "I swear to you, by the earth that I inhabit, and by you who made me, that if you will make a friend for me, I will quit the neighborhood of men and dwell, as may chance, in the most savage places. My evil passions will have fled, for I shall have met with sympathy. If I have no ties and no affections, hatred and vice must be my portion. But the love of another will destroy the cause of my crime. My vices are the children of my solitude. My virtues will arise when I live in communion with an equal. Oh, to feel the affection of a sensitive being." Now, that's the cry we all utter. We long for people to enter our lives, to tangle heartstrings with them, to have that deep, loving relationships that will bring out the best things that are in us. But we're afraid that when we begin to reveal ourselves to another, they'll say, "Egad, a monster," and turn away. And so, we don't do what Jonathan did. See, he went to David and said, "Look, I'm willing to risk myself with you. I'm willing to reveal to you my need of you. I'm willing to express myself as I really am. Now, are you willing to risk some part of yourself with me? Will you reveal yourself to me? Can we enter the dance of friendship together?" It takes courage to do that. But I submit, that's where meaningful friendship begins, with an act of invitation and an act of vulnerability. Now, the second step to friendship is pointed out to us in the 19th chapter of 1 Samuel, where it's shown that David and Jonathan have a common purpose in their friendship. And it seems to me that deep friendships always have a common purpose, which cements them together and makes them into the beautiful things they are. You remember that Jonathan was the most popular personality in Israel until David's star came on the scene. Jonathan was a military hero. Now, he'd been especially victorious in two battles, the battle at Gilbeth that we find in chapter 14, and the battle at Michmash later in the same chapter. He was the most popular personality of his day, But after David killed Goliath, then the chants of the people were in favor of David. And when Jonathan therefore entered into friendship with David, he was doing something that could have no other effect than to lift David and lower Jonathan. And yet, he didn't hesitate to do this. Why? Because Jonathan had the same purpose that David did. Together, they loved their God and they loved their country. And this common purpose is what united them, what sealed them together, what created their oneness. We often, we think of friendship as a kind of game in which one individual makes a move, another individual makes a move, one acts and the other reacts. That's not how it works. Friendship's not a game. In reality, it's actually two games played simultaneously. Both games go on the same way. A good analogy for it would be a dance, where each of the partners is moving in synchronization with the other. And by glances of the eyes, expression of the face, words, movements, we keep in touch. So there's this harmony. There's this beauty in what we're doing. Now, this can only happen if both partners are dancing to the same music. If they're listening to different music, different melodies, the results will be awkward, graceless, not beautiful at all. Now, that oneness as music is the oneness of purpose that unites two people into a meaningful friendship. And this is the reason why I would argue that Christians enter into deeper friendships than other people do. I'm not saying non-Christians don't have deep friendships. I'm just saying that, to my observation at least, Christians enter deeper friendships. There's a reason for this. And that reason is being caught up in the purposes of God in your life. You see, to the non-believer, they see life as a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. They understand life to not have at its center love, but confusion. Not order, but disorder. Not a God who cares, but some dumb fate or blind chance that threw the whole process together like dice on a casino table. Now, when you see life in such negative terms, it takes an awful lot of courage to risk anything, to bet on anything. But when you're a Christian and you understand that love is at the center of life, and that it's God, the one who loves us, who cares for us, who has created the world as it is, and that in that world, He cares for us supremely and calls us to friendship with one another. Now, when you see the world that way, you're more willing to make the risk in the investment that friendship is. When you know that we have the kind of God who, at the center of life, dances for joy in the desert when His children return to Him, or runs like a father to greet his prodigal son, then you understand He's the kind of God who will leave the 99 to go after the one. You're willing to bet something on that kind of love. The Christian enters into deeper friendships because he knows that it's all right to love. We say, everyone knows that. I respond, if everyone knows that, how is it that so few do it? So, Christians can enter into the kind of relationship that's risky because you understand that you move in common purpose with God. And the Christian and God ultimately cannot lose. So, when Captain Robert Scott led his faithful journey to Antarctica, if you've heard of that, he had with him a young officer named Edward Wilson. Now, Captain Scott led a first journey to Antarctica that was very successful. He led a second journey that had a very different ending. But in that, Wilson kept a diary. And he also wrote these beautiful letters to his wife. And these have been published. One of the letters, Wilson writes these words: I get an hour to myself as a rule before breakfast, when I'm quite alone. And I sometimes pray. And sometimes I read your letters. And sometimes I write to you. And I feel that it is all communion with God. To pray, or to read a letter from his beloved wife, and that's friendship at its purest. Or to write a letter to his wife, he understands it all to be communion with God. And when you see friendship in these terms, experiencing God in another person, then friendship authentically deepens. Now, the third step in meaningful friendship is to enter into sacrificial service of your friend. Now, this is outlined for us in the 20th chapter of 1 Samuel. Here we have the episode of the arrows. Saul is trying to kill David. Jonathan's trying to placate Saul so he won't go after his friend. He arranges for David to hide behind a rock. Then he seeks to convert Saul to friendship with David again. And he says to David, I'll give you a signal, whether it's safe to come or not. I will shoot some arrows. When the boy goes after the arrows, I will say to the boy, come closer, they are close to me, then you may come closer. David, for all is well, but if I say to the boy, the arrows are beyond you, then you must go beyond the borders of this country into safety, where you'll be protected from the wrath of my father. Now, when Jonathan did this, he entered into quite a risk. If his father had ever discovered it, he would have lost his life. And yet, when David stayed as close as he did, he was also in imminent danger. He was risking. Both of them were making sacrifices for each other. Now, 2,500 years ago, Mahanda Buddha walked the mangroves of India. And at a place called Balhar, he was asked by one of his disciples what the 5 things necessary for life were. The things that give life, happiness, and joy. And Buddha replied as followed. First, restraint. Second, proper discourse. Third, energy given to good thoughts. Fourth, the firm pursuit of those thoughts. And fifth, insight. But then he continued, above all of these things, Buddha said, the seeker for happiness must learn to be a good friend. The disciple said to the master teacher, Buddha, well, what is friendship? And Buddha said, friendship is to have greater hope of the welfare of others than you do for the welfare of yourself. Now, I'm not a Buddhist, but don't hesitate to take truth wherever I find it. And here I find in many words what Jesus later summarized most perfectly in a single sentence when he said, "Greater love hath no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends." That is the sacrificial serving of one another. Now, years ago I happened to hear of a dinner conversation that a friend of mine had with somebody you might remember, if you're old enough, Lowell Thomas. He, with Walter Cronkite, was one of the famous news reporters of the 60s and 70s. During the course of the conversation, Lowell told two people he knew. One was named Harry Reid, not that Harry Reid, and Cal Myers. They were two miners in Las Vegas, but not Las Vegas, Nevada, Las Vegas, New Mexico. So they'd gone down into a 180-foot shaft, and they placed 11 charges of dynamite, with, of course, long fuses, long enough to give them plenty of time to escape. Now, the ignited fuses began to run from the tunnel, and as they were running out, Myers was considerably ahead of Reid. For some reason, nobody knows to this day, one of the charges exploded prematurely, and it sent hundreds of slivers into stone into the legs of Harry Reid, and it rendered him unconscious. Myers, at the same time, reached the safety on the upper level. He turned around, called back for his friend. No response. So, with a moment's hesitation, he suddenly turned around, ran back into the shaft. Now, mind you, 10 other charges are already ignited, 10 fuses are burning down, and an imminent explosion that's going to render this entire tunnel a tomb. He went in the middle of this, found his friend, threw his body over his shoulder, carried him out of the tunnel, and they got out just as the charges went off. Now, the owners of the mine immediately suggested that Cal Myers be given the Carnegie Medal for courage. And Myers said, "I don't want any medal. My friend Harry is alive." That's all. See, that kind of loving service, that kind of sacrifice is at the very center of what friendship is. Now, there's a gradation on that. There's an implication of that, which I think constitutes the fourth and the last meaningful step in friendship. In building, in establishing, nourishing friendships, and that last step is what I'd call trust. It's explained to us in the 20th chapter of 1 Samuel. And what I mean by trust is this. When two individuals have become vulnerable to each other, they've initiated friendship, they've discovered common purpose, they've given themselves to God in the fulfillment of that purpose, then they enter in such a depth of relationship that they're able to sacrifice for one another. You keep that going, it's not long till you come to the place where you'll be so trusting of each other that you don't have to insist that the other person is always with you. So, they don't desecrate their friendship by seeking to dominate their friend. You'll notice in the story how Jonathan's quite willing for David to go. If that's what's best for David, then Jonathan does not fear him entering into other friendships, or entering into other relationships, or entering into other mateships. He doesn't fear what the future holds, because he understands that the Lord will be between him and David forever. I saw a very pathetic demonstration of this when I was living away from home at college. And there was this freshman girl named Debbie. I have a vivid memory of that. She was next door. She was terribly homesick. She spent 4 days a week thinking about home. Now, the last 3 days of the week were okay because her parents came to visit every weekend. Yeah. And they had to drive hundreds of miles to be there. And they'd come up, they'd spend all Friday, all Saturday, all Sunday with her. And it didn't take us long to figure out what was happening. Debbie would work and do nothing but work. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, to get ready for their arrival. She had no opportunity to build friendships. She hardly talked to us, and we were next door to her. She was spending all of her time getting ready for this relationship that she'd invested the first 18 years of her life into. Yeah, we had a dorm advisor who had to sit down with the parents and be very blunt with them. Say, stay home, please. Please love your daughter enough to cut the ties. Yeah, give her the experience of meeting other people and trust her to begin new loves. Now, that may be hard for a parent to hear, but it was crucial for Debbie to be able to grow. Look, almost everyone in ministry has had this experience in marriage counseling. And you get the boy or the girl or the husband or wife, he says, he's not the man I married. She's not the one I married. And you know what? In most instances, that's correct. Yeah. After the two married, they entered into the deep friendship that married is, but they hadn't progressed to that place of trust. So, as a result, he wasn't allowed to go out with the boys anymore, although they'd been friends for years. And she wasn't allowed to go out with the girls anymore because even though they'd been friends for years, all the activities that he or she used to be able to do with other people, those have suddenly been cut off, and they only do everything as a couple. Now, the only friendships they had were the friendships where they both liked the boy and the girl. No couples where they didn't like just one, no single people. Now, you do that, and your lives change. Their lives change so that, I talk with these people, and they aren't the people that they had married. If their friendship and love was deep enough, they would have trusted each other to go out and experience other people, to enjoy other people, to be loved, to love others. Trust is the most difficult and yet the most essential element of friendship. Now, I'd like to sum up all of this by telling you a children's story. So, written a while back by a man named Shel Silverstein. It's about a boy in a tree. So, the boy would come to the woods, to this tree, and he'd play by the tree, and the tree loved the boy. The tree loved to have the boy take its leaves and make crowns as he marched through the woods. He loved to have the boy swing from his branches and eat apples, which were his fruit, and to fall asleep at the end of the afternoon in the shade. This made the tree very happy. As the boy grew older, he would come to the tree with his girlfriend. Once he even carved in the side of the tree a heart in which he put his initials and her initials. But, hey, the boy and the girl were still in the shade, and they sometimes played with the branches. They occasionally ate the apples. So the tree was happy. But then the boy didn't come to the tree for a very long time. One time, he came and he said he wanted to get his girl something nice and he needed some money to do it. And the tree said, well, Why don't you take my apples, sell them in the city? And with the money, you could be able to buy the gift. And so the boy, and I'll quote the book here, take them and every one of them, and you may build your house. And so with hammer and saw and apple saw the boy, now a man, chop every branch from the tree. But the tree was happy. And then some years later, the boy, now middle-aged man, came and said, I want to take my family on a boat ride. I want a boat. And the tree, now nothing more than a naked trunk standing against the skyline, said, well, you may take my trunk, and from my trunk you may fashion a boat. And the boy took the trunk and made the boat, and what was left of the tree was happy. And one day, after many years, when the boy was an old, old man, he came into the woods again. The tree was nothing but a broken stump. And the tree said, I can no longer give you apples to eat. I have no teeth with which to eat them. I can no longer offer you branches in which to swing. I have no strength to swing. I cannot give you my trunk to make a boat, to travel to far places. I've been to those places and there's nothing left to see. There's really nothing I can give you. I'm just a stump now. All I'm looking for is someplace to sit in the sun and rest a while. So the tree pulled itself up as straight as a trunk can and said, well, at least stumps are good for sitting. And the story closes with that line, that the tree was happy again. Now, to me, this is a model of what Christian friendship is. That kind of loving, sharing, sacrifice. That's easier to see when I'm not crying. Sorry about that. That's loving, sharing. Sacrifice leads to trust. It leads to relationships like Jonathan and David's. And David, speaking of his friendship with Jonathan years later, said, "O Jonathan, thy love for me was wonderful, even surpassing that of a woman." Let us pray. Oh God, our Father, give us courage enough to run the risk of relationship, openness enough to invite, purposefulness enough to be one with another in service and in thy love. Oh God, make us loving enough to sacrifice, and sacrificing enough to trust. May we know what it is to have a friend. For we ask this in the name of that one who loved us and gave himself for us, that friend whose friendship is perfect and forever. Amen. Now, Ken closes each session with a passage that I absolutely love as a benediction, and I'd like to do that again today. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace. Thank you.